Ambiguities of Activism by Ingrid Hooft. In this book, Hooft critiques the implementation of activism, specifically reviewing no border activism, new media activism, and climate change activism. She identifies contradictory processes and claims. Hooft is a passionate activist with strongly developed views, beliefs, and values about the structure and implementation of activism. She has a long background of activism and exposure to specifically new media activism. She carries her personal activist lens and beliefs throughout her critique. The intended audience of ambiguities of activism is not explicitly stated, but the high level of language complexity, including terminology, language structure, references, and density, insinuates that this literature is for readers who have background knowledge of activism and high levels of reading literacy. The language structure of the book adds to the complexity Hooft wants to engage the reader in and sets the frame for the discussion of activism. Hooft argues that the discussions and practices that activism propose include problematic frameworks that undermine activist intentions. She argues that activist discourses contradict its own values by using speed elite practices and strategies that complement elitist global hierarchies. I argue that Hooft's critique draws on numerous examples and references to provide a dynamic and complex view of activism that becomes complicated with the high level of language and structure. Hooft's book explores the relationship between a long history of activism and the rising levels of inequality and poverty in an attempt to determine the point in which activism discourses enable the processes, demands, and practices of the elite. Specifically, the Western technologically enhanced elite referred to as the speed elite. The book, self-admitted by Hooft, provides a perfect example of Western ideals being promoted by activist methods and practices. Hooft has developed her solutions and activism expectations based on Western beliefs and models. Continually, she uses methods of capitalism, specifically the creation, publication, and selling of her book, which she explicitly critiques other activists for doing. In order to digest the text, readers are required to have background knowledge of terminology and processes involved with activism, high level of reading literacy, and time. Hooft's complicated and dense text is not easily read and requires the reader to slow down, read, and reread sections. Hooft provides a detailed note section at the end of the book to accompany the complexity of the literature. Hooft's argument was clearly stated and explored throughout the book and was fueled with passion and her own personal connection to activism. The format and structure of the information demonstrated the complexity surrounding activism and hierarchies, but at times, Hooft makes large assumptions about authors and their works, including a reference to a lazy misinterpretation by many activists. Hooft engages in deep exploration of the problems or contradictions activists face, but provide few concrete solutions. For example, Hooft provides the broad solution that individuals need to reassess, slow down, and think through complex issues. This solution provides little framework for understanding and future action. What am I supposed to assess? What issues am I thinking about? What influencing factors am I focusing on? And what am I supposed to do now? Hooft supports her article by the exploration of numerous activists, including but not limited to Paolo Verno, Michael Hart, Sandra Ponzanesi, Antonia Negri, and Hakeem Bey. Hooft's analysis of activism provides a thorough explanation of the contradictory or problematic practices and discourses surrounding activism. Hooft explains that the activism practices currently being supported are unsustainable and may lead to the collapse of the system. Individuals interested in sustainability need to critically evaluate the programs and policies that are being pushed through. Where are these programs coming from? What results did they create? Who is marginalized in the process? Who is left out? The implications for educators include the need to use critical thinking skills when exposed to a piece of information or practice to determine the real intentions and the real effects. This can be applied to literature and events surrounding activism, but these critical thinking skills can also be reflected on by educators in other topics. Educators can reflect on their own values and beliefs and how their own practices may support or hinder these views.